welcome to this episode of Inside the PSC, where we take a look at the inner workings of West Virginia's Public Service Commission. With me today is a well-respected guest. He's returning on the show with us, Mr. Robert Williams, the Director of the Consumer Advocate Division. We've got plenty of great questions to get in with him today, but before we do, we're going to take a quick look at the video from our chairman, Charlotte Lane, about the challenges of progress in the Mountain State.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Lane, Chairman of the West Virginia Public Service Commission. West Virginia has approximately 500 water and sewer utilities. The Public Service Commission of West Virginia is often asked to examine the operations of these essential systems and to determine whether the public is being provided safe and reliable service. The Commission gets requests regarding systems that can no longer function safely. In some cases, managers of a system determine they need help. They tell the Commission someone else must run their operations. Sometimes systems need help but won't admit it. Concern for public health caused the legislature to pass a law in 2020 to allow the Commission to examine any troubled system if these operations aren't providing safe and reliable service. The law allows the Commission to assign a healthy utility to take over the operations of a non-functioning or poorly operating entity if the public health is endangered. We get pushback in some of these cases. People don't want to lose local control. People don't want to pay higher rates. People don't like change. We understand all that. None of us like change, but sometimes it is necessary. As aging systems lose their source of income because of dwindling populations, we are going to see more of these cases, and we are going to be forced to step in to make sure your health and safety are protected. We are not seeking a wholesale change, but we are seeing differences that reflect a changing world out there for all of us. This is how we keep your home and your community healthy.
That was yet another great video from our chairman, always sharing such interesting topics with us on our YouTube channel. Well, Robert, thank you for being back with us today. I'm very excited to get into some of these questions. I know last time we touched on a little bit of everything.
Yes.
So this time we've got another great variety. I'll just go ahead and kick us off with, how did the Consumer Advocate come into being at the PSC? What's the history? What purpose does it serve?
Well, Alexis, it really goes back to in 1970s and through there. The PSC hadn't changed dramatically since 1913, when it was created by the legislature. It is a legislative body and it performs a legislative function, and so the legislature sets out the parameters on how they'd like the PSC to be structured and give it the authority to do what it needs to do for regulating utilities. There really weren't a lot of rate cases until the mid-70s. And all of a sudden, utilities started doing more growth, more building, and they had some dramatic increases at that point. And you had to come up with a new structure for handling all these new cases coming in. And the legislature addressed that in 1980. They put out a piece of legislation that set out a new directive for reorganization for the commission. And one of the things that they wanted is they wanted to have a group that advocating directly for utility customers and consumers in front of the PSC that weren't under the PSC directly. They were free to do advocacy functions different from the decision-making functions and everything that the commission was already charged with doing. So the Consumer Advocate was born out of that, and the reorganization was filed by the PSC in response to that in the General Order 195. And it was implemented in 1981. So that's when the Consumer Advocate Division was created. And Billy Jack Gregg was the first director of the Consumer Advocate Division. He actually first appeared in front of the commission in a, not as consumer advocate, but there was a group of people that were objecting to a proposed transmission line that was coming near their property in Putnam County. And Billy Jack, owner, and several other people that later were on the Consumer Advocate Division were part of that group that opposed it. It included people with engineering degrees, people with financial degrees. And the current chairman at that time, E. Anders McDonald, was impressed with them and he approached Billy Jack Gregg about being the first director
Wow.
based on his participation in that case.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's a fun fact.
So that was where it started, and Billy was there for several years until about 2005, I believe, when it was changed over to Byron Harris. And Byron Harris would have been the director for a while, and then Jackie Roberts was director, and then I came on as director in 2021.
Oh, okay. Well, since you've been director, have you seen significant changes over the years?
Yeah, there's really been quite a bit, because I would have been in the commission in a different capacity in the 80s as well, so I knew a lot of the people and the issues we had. The biggest things that have happened right now, the biggest challenge is we have different types of rate cases, and we have a lot of multiple filings. So it used to be you would have one major rate case filed each year if you had one. Now we're having multiple cases filed with each utility each year, talking about smaller increments. And that makes it a challenge for something like Consumer Advocate Division. They were first built and structured for intervening in major rate cases, just a few a year, not participating in that many filings and having the staff in there. So usually we'd be hiring experts from around the country to participate in major rate cases. You can't afford to bring in an expert on every little filing.
Right.
So we have to marshal our resources some, decide what issues we want to be more active in, and where we can give consumers more bang for our buck with the resources that we have.
Right. So in your time that you've been there, have you asked for and been granted additional resources?
I have been able to about double my budget for bringing in experts, and so I do have some people kind of on retainer where we can use them as need be outside of major rate cases. But we had like 3 major rate cases in the past year, which was a number of large fines, and we had dozens of smaller fines we had to do as well to protect the interests of residential ratepayers. So it's different, but I think the biggest change right now, if I'm comparing things from the 80s when it was done, a lot of what the biggest challenge we have right now is, one of the biggest challenges is how we're going to support our electric grid for the future. Most of the coal-fired plants we have currently in existence were built in the 70s and 80s. And as you know now, there's a push to close a lot of those electric plants. You have, with decarbonization goals set by some other states, you had the EPA trying to knock some things out to advance the acceleration of coal-fired plants. West Virginia was pushing against that because most of our coal-fired resources were what we used to heat our homes. It's very much of a job creator for our state, and we didn't want to close them prematurely. But the biggest challenge is how we replace this capacity in the next few years. And there is going to be a transition. It's probably been slowed up a little bit by the current election because some of the EPA rules that we're pushing for the immediate closure of plants might be delayed some, but that's just delaying the transition to give us more time to replace these resources with something else that's greener and more friendly. We have like Nucor coming in is probably the biggest driver we've had in quite a while, coming in with a new development that's due to come online in 2025. There's going to be some other industrial growth that's going to be significant with that. We have some other battery technology that's being looked at in the northern part of the state. But when you think about what we're replacing with the old transition to the new, what we built in the 1970s and 1980 was designed to be able to take care of the industries we had at that time. And at that time we had a lot of demand we had a vibrant steel industry in parts of the state. We had a vibrant coal industry that was here. And a lot of the coal plants, if you can think about, even when you're trying to serve different types of power, if you're talking about coal mines in southern West Virginia, there's a lot of electricity needed to run a coal mine and make sure the miners are safe underground and operating the machinery, make sure they have the oxygen flowing and can meet all the needs they have. Most of our grid inside of West Virginia was built to serve those loads. And as those loads disappear, we have a lot of structure here. We have a lot of transmission. We have a lot of capacity here to meet the needs of the future. But we had also built a grid that was intended to serve more than just West Virginia. We were serving the needs of the Eastern Seaboard and the surrounding states as well with our additional generation. And now, as they're wanting to take those things out offline, all that investment that was there to support that large growth is all going to be falling on the backs of the residential ratepayers and people that are still here if we don't find other loads to replace it, we find a more reasonable way to meet those demands in the future. So this is really a big challenge that we know we're going through a large transition. We know it's going to affect ratepayers significantly. We're trying to make sure the resources that we have are used for as long as they can be efficiently. And also planning for a future that's going to include, possible new growth in the area to help build West Virginia up.
Right.
But until you get more customers, until you get more load, everything's being forced on a smaller and smaller shrinking group. And it's making our rates drive up dramatically.
It's keeping you busy, huh?
It's keeping us real busy.
So let's dive into a little bit about differentiating between the consumer advocate team and the commission staff. How does the role and function of the consumer advocate differ from the commission staff, and especially in cases before the commission?
In cases in front of the commission staff's involved in each and every case filing that's made in front of the commission. So when I said there's probably 800,000 cases that come in, some of them are small tariff filings, some of them are construction projects. They have a lot of things with water and sewer through the area. Commission staff is involved in each and every case in front of the commission, and they're making recommendations, performing audits, and they're looking at the overall needs and recommendations they're making to the commission. They can consider the interest of the different customers, but they're not really favoring one customer class over another. They're trying to resolve the whole case. When the consumer advocates coming in, we're providing the perspective of, we're just interested mostly about residential ratepayers and also general service ratepayers that are affected by things. And we're trying to see what their interests are. If you have a case coming in, you'll have commission staff making a proposal on what it thinks is reasonable. You're going to have several other intervening groups come in. The large industrial customers are going to have this own set of attorneys where they hire a law firm to represent them. They'll bring in their own experts. We might have other intervening groups come in. Large municipalities may get involved. We have other public interest groups that might come in to advocate for their particular perspective. But we're in there mostly to see how's this going to affect residential consumers and how it's going to affect their interests. And that's our obligation, to go in there and say, we want to make sure that their considerations are in there because everybody else is arguing for their group. We've got to make sure they have a voice to at least protect their interest in there. So staff is looking at the whole picture, and then the other people are intervening and giving different perspectives, and we're giving a residential perspective at the same time.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So are there times where your office may take positions or advance in arguments which are significantly different than those advanced by the commission staff?
That can happen. Most of the time we try to work with them together, but we're developing our testimony and our issues separately. So our testimony might be different when we get in there, and we'll compare what we're proposing to what they're proposing. Sometimes we'll meet ahead of time and try to see if we can mesh certain on issues on rates of return, on rate design. But there are times when we can have significant difference between us, and we'll both push for our own positions.
Okay. So we're going to take a quick break and watch another video from the chairman. This video is about the wonders of electricity.
I'm Charlotte Lane, Chairman of the West Virginia Public Service Commission. Could anything be more important to us or less thought of than the electricity we use every day? Electricity transformed humankind. It lengthened our days for both leisure and work. It warms us and cools us. It fostered miraculous progress in medicine, science, and exploration. It made computers, telephones, television, and airplanes possible. It has allowed us to reach for the stars and beyond. The National Academy of Engineering chose electricity as mankind's single greatest engineering achievement of the 20th century. In West Virginia, we are fortunate to have two major electrical utilities serving our state. These systems are backed up by a regional transmission system that allows us to share electric power with 13 states and the District of Columbia. While storms occasionally down power lines, it is rare that we are out of electricity for very long. We don't suffer the electric brownouts or blackouts that plague so many urban landscapes in our country because the power supply can't keep up with the heavy demands. While our power sources are not perfect, I would put them up against just about any other system in the nation. I think for reliability, our power companies, backed by regional grid, generally provide a good product. So as you drive around and see the colorful twinkling holiday lights that make this season so delightful, give a thought to the magical power that is so helpful to all of us and makes such a difference in our lives.
That was another great video. The holidays are a perfect time to appreciate electricity. So, how do you overcome what still must be some of the public's concerns about your division being part of the PSC? How do you separate from it?
We separate in a way where our budget is separate. We hire people separately. I bring in my own experts, and all that's done under my own budget. So if I'm selecting an expert or advancing a position, I'm doing it on my own decision of who I want to bring in, what issues we want to develop, how we want to argue the case before the commission. If we disagree with the ultimate decision of the commission, we're allowed to appeal it directly. Commission staff doesn't appeal commission orders because they also work for the commission, but we don't have that restriction on us. I think mostly we are physically in a different building, so
Right.
we are physically separated. We also have our own budget that is separate, but we do draw from the commission's funds for a source of funding. So when the commission makes this budget presentation, I will follow up and make my budget presentation because my budget is a piece inside of their larger budget. But once the money's come in, I have total control over, how I use that and what kind of resources I spend it on.
Okay. So, in several cases recently, the Consumer Advocate Division has joined into proposed settlement arguments with one or more parties to resolve the outcome of a rate case before it goes to a full hearing.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of a settlement, and what goes into your office deciding whether or not to enter into opposing a proposed settlement?
Okay. Just backing up with the rate case in general, when we're developing our issues, like I said earlier, we're doing an audit of things with our experts. We're developing testimony. Commission staff does its own independent audit, and the other parties do as well. So we might have, the Citizens Action Group involved in something. We might have Sierra Club involved. Solar United Neighbors will be there. We'll have the Energy Users Group. Energy Efficient West Virginia can be there. And they can all have different perspectives on a case. And we can have different recommendations we're wanting to advance and different arguments we're wanting to advance. And of course, the utility's wanting to get as much money as it can out of this rate case, and it's filed what it believes it thinks it's entitled to. And the commission, we know, is going to make a decision based on this full volume of evidence. When you go in there, you're not really sure what the commission is going to do with all that. You might have an idea. But if the parties can at least take some of the uncertainty out and reach a compromise on different issues that we think can work for all of our interests, then sometimes we'll enter into a settlement and agreement. And there will be times when you'll see a settlement that comes down that they might not have all parties signing off on it. And they'll say, we're not joining, but we won't object. There's other times when they won't enter into the settlement and they say, we're objecting to that. So when you have a proposed settlement coming in, you're telling the commission, this is what the parties have gotten together and we've decided this is a good resolution. The commission is authorized, well, if it looks at it, they can decide that, well, we don't like that settlement. We'd like to hear the full hearing anyway and make our own decision. So all that's just proposed by the parties to the commission. The commission can still do a full hearing on it, or they can hear different parts of the issues on it, and they can come with a separate decision, or they can modify the stipulation as they see fit. Then we can decide whether we're agreeing with the stipulation or not. When you see most of the language of stipulation, we always say that this is reflecting a compromise of all the issues, because we might give on one issue and take on another one where we think the end result's acceptable to us. But if the commission modifies it after that, then we have to decide whether we want to challenge that enough to undo the stipulation or go forward with it.
So when other parties or public interest groups participate in cases, does your division's perspective usually align, or can it differ?
It can differ. If you have somebody like, say, the Sierra Club, they'll come in with a strong environmental interest, and they're interested in basically shutting down carbon-producing type of resources and replace it with something else. Same thing with Solar Energy United. While those are goals that are consistent with their groups, and it might do things that usually cost money, because you got to replace it with some other resource, or like I said earlier, you might be asking a coal plant that we're already on the hook to pay for, whether it produces energy or not. If that's taken off service too long, that can have a detrimental rate impact on consumers. So we might say that, well, while decarbonization goals are nice in the long run, we don't necessarily agree with the time schedule you want to do it on. Or if we're wanting to do energy efficiency savings, one thing that's different, a lot of things that they have energy efficiency programs that are funded by utilities that have been put in over the years that have good goals, but there's certain aspects of it that we don't like. So like if let's say an industrial user does things to make his plant more efficient, it gets to keep the cost savings from it. They've made an expenditure, they get to keep it. With a lot of things we have on energy efficiency in West Virginia now, if the utility is paying for the program and it generates reduced uses of energy as a result of it, they actually currently get the lost revenues and recover that. So they say, well, we're not making as much money on that as we used to. We get to recover the lost revenues as part of this program. With us, we think that's not really too reasonable. We think that we ought to get away from that. That if consumers are putting in energy saving things over time, the rest of the ratepayers shouldn't have to pick up the tab on that. It should just be less usage, less reduction. And that energy is freed up for something else. They could sell it to another state. They could be available to serve other customers. But we shouldn't have to guarantee that they keep that same level of revenue.
Right. So we're running a little short on time, but I do want to ask you this. What significant challenges are coming up in the next few years? And what can the average consumer do to make sure their voice is being heard by the legislatures and the commission in future rate cases?
I think the best thing that consumers can do right now is I know that energy bills are hitting everybody hard. And unfortunately, there's going to be things that are going to make those rates go up. Make your voices be heard where you know that, hey, this is how it's impacting my family. I'm having to make decisions on how I'm going to spend my limited resources. I can't afford a higher rate increase. My salary is not going up to match these huge increases in electricity. They can write to the commission. They can intervene and they can submit comments in writing. When they have opportunities to appear at public hearings, we're trying to make opportunities for them to appear remotely and make their comments, appear in person and make their comments. Let people know that there needs to be something that's done to slow down these continuous rate increases. And maybe we can find some creative solutions, but most of those will require some sort of legislative intervention where they find other sources of monies to pay for these upgrades and improvements other than ratepayers.
Right.
I'll give you an example is like right now we have for the city of Nitro right now, there's a lot of utilities that are having their sewer and water utilities are kind of in disrepair. They need to have something done to them. They need to do something to take care of it. Western American is stepping in to take over the nitro plant. The proposal that's in there right now is that they pay Nitro $20 million for a plant that's worth about $8 million.
Wow.
And that means Nitro has $12 million of extra money to do projects with, which sounds good to Nitro. Why that's bad for consumers is that means that this $20 million rate base that includes $12 million for projects is now going to be paid for by residential ratepayers.
Right.
So they've now basically been asked to fund a grant to Nitro as a part of this project. That doesn't sound fair to me. There ought to be other ways of doing these kind of fundings without doing that. And then on top of that, once it's acquired, Western American's going to have to do another $25 million of investment to fix up this plant. If we can find other resources to fund that other than ratepayer dollars, and to me it seems fair to do that with taxpayer dollars, that's something the legislature can make happen that the commission can't. The commission can't create a new source of funds. It has to decide what it's going to do with the funds that are available. But if the legislature can create another funding source for doing things like this, then these projects can go forward with taxpayer support
Right.
rather than falling on the smaller group of Western American Water Company
Right.
ratepayers.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, and that's a great example. Well, thank you, Robert, for joining us today on this episode of Inside the PSC, where we take a look at the inner workings of the West Virginia Public Service Commission. See you next time.
Thank you, Alexis.
Yep.